The sound of a king toppling against a marble board is louder than a gunshot in a quiet room. Julian Thorne thought he owned the world. He thought the woman in the stained apron was just the help, and nobody wiping tables for minimum wage. He laughed when he tossed $100 bill at her, challenging her to a game he thought she couldn't possibly understand. He made the mistake of judging a book by its cover. He didn't see the genius hiding behind the exhaustion. He didn't know that the waitress he was mocking was once a prodigy the world had forgotten. By the time he realized he was walking into a trap, his empire was already crumbling. This is the story of the most expensive chess game ever played. The rain in Seattle was relentless, a grey curtain that seemed to wash away the hope of anyone earning less than 6 figures a year. Inside the Obsidian Lounge, however, the weather didn't exist. The air was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, scented with sandalwood and old money. Elena Vance adjusted her apron, wincing as the stiff fabric dug into a bruise on her hip, a souvenir from bumping into the industrial dishwasher earlier that shift. She was 24, but tonight she felt 50. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that gave her a headache, and her feet throbbed in cheap, non-slip shoes. Table 4 needs a refill on the scotch, the 1982 Macallan. Don't spill it, or I'll take it out of your tips for the next decade. Rick, the floor manager, hissed into her ear. Rick was a man whose ambition far exceeded his competence, and he treated the waitstaff like serfs. Yes, Rick, Elena said, her voice a flat line. She grabbed the crystal decanter. Table 4 was the center of the universe tonight. Occupying the plush leather booth was Julian Thorne. At 32, Julian was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a tech conglomerate that was currently eating up smaller companies like a shark in a goldfish bowl. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline, icy blue eyes, and a tailor-made suit that cost more than Elena's entire college tuition debt. Sitting across from him was Marcus Sterling, a rival hedge fund manager. Between them sat a chess set. It wasn't just any set. It was hand-carved ebony and ivory, the pieces weighted with gold. Elena approached the table, making herself invisible. That was the trick to being a high-end waitress. Be present enough to serve, but absent enough not to exist. Check, Julian said, his voice smooth and dripping with arrogance. You're sloppy tonight, Marcus. You're letting your emotions dictate your night movement. Marcus grunted, loosening his tie. Just pour the drink, he snapped, not at Julian, but at the air near Elena. Elena poured. Her hand was steady as a surgeon's. As the amber liquid swirled into the glass, her eyes inadvertently flicked to the board. It was a mess. Marcus was playing the London system, but he had overextended his bishops. Julian, playing black, had set a subtle trap on the D-file. A blind man could see Marcus was 3 moves away from a forced mate, yet he was still aggressively pushing his pawns. Eyes on the glass, sweetheart, Julian said. Elena froze. She hadn't realized she had stopped pouring. She pulled the decanter back, catching the last drop before it could stain the white tablecloth. Apologies, sir, she murmured, clutching the tray against her chest. Julian leaned back, swirling his glass. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her name tag. Elena, you seem fascinated by the board. Do the little horse pieces confuse you? The men at the table chuckled. It was a low, cruel sound. Elena kept her head down. No, sir. Just admiring the craftsmanship. Craftsmanship, Julian repeated, mocking her tone. He looked at Marcus. See, even the help appreciates the aesthetics, even if the strategy is miles above their pay grade. I should get back to work, Elena said, turning to leave. She needed to keep this job. Her mother's medical bills were due on Thursday, and she was $300 short. Wait, Julian commanded. It wasn't a request. Elena stopped. You looked at the board for a long time, Julian said, his eyes narrowing. He was bored. He had beaten Marcus 5 times in a row, and Julian Thorne hated being bored. He needed a new toy. Tell me, Elena. Who is winning? Rick, the manager, was watching from the shadows, his face pale. If Eleanor offended the billionaire, Rick would fire her before she reached the kitchen. Eleanor took a breath. She looked at the board. Really looked at it. The chaotic geometry of the pieces resolved itself in her mind. It was like reading a sentence in a language she had spoken since birth. Black, Eleanor said softly. Black wins in 3 moves. The table went silent. Marcus laughed, a bark of incredulity. 3 moves? I have him on the defensive. Look at his queen, she's pinned. Julian, however, didn't laugh. He looked at the board, then back at the waitress. He replayed the position in his head. Knight to e4. Bishop takes. Queen to... His eyes widened slightly. She was right. It was a forced mate in 3, an obscure line, but a definite one. Lucky guess, Julian said, dismissing the chill that ran down his spine. He knocked his king over, signaling his victory over Marcus, but his eyes remained on Eleanor. You play? My father taught me, Eleanor said. A long time ago. How quaint, Julian sneered. Daddy's little girl playing checkers on the porch. Chess, sir, not checkers. The correction hung in the air. You didn't correct Julian Thorne. Julian's smile became razor-thin. He gestured to the empty seat where Marcus had been sitting. Sit down. Sir, I'm on shift. My manager. I'll buy the club if I have to, Julian interrupted. Sit. Down. Elena looked at Rick. Rick was sweating, nodding frantically, mouthing the words, do it. Elena sat. The leather was cool against her uniform. She felt small, dirty, and out of place. But as she looked at the 64 squares, a strange calm washed over her. The noise of the club faded. The smell of expensive cologne vanished. There was only the grid. I don't play for free, Julian said, resetting the pieces with rapid, practiced hands. And I assume a waitress can't afford my usual stakes. I have nothing to bet, Elena said quietly. Oh, everyone has something, Julian countered. He pulled a heavy gold money clip from his pocket and tossed a stack of bills onto the table. $5,000. Cash. Right here. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. $5,000. That covered the medical bills, the rent, the debt. It was freedom for 3 months. And if I lose? She asked. Julian looked her up and down, his gaze insulting. If you lose, you stand on this table and announce to the entire club that you are an uneducated, presumptuous gold digger who should stick to wiping floors. And then you quit. It was cruel. It was unnecessary. It was classic Julian Thorne. Elena looked at the money. Then she looked at Julian's smug face. She remembered the nights her father made her study Kasparov's games by candlelight when the power was cut. She remembered the sacrifices. She remembered that she wasn't just a waitress. Deal, Elena said. But I want the white pieces. Julian laughed. Aggressive, I like it. Take them. Elena reached out. Her hand, rough from scrubbing dishes, hovered over the pawn on E2. The game had begun. News travelled fast in the Obsidian Lounge. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns holding flutes of champagne formed a semicircle around table 4. It was a spectacle. The billionaire versus the waitress. A gladiator match for the bored elite. Julian poured himself another drink, looking relaxed. He expected this to be over in 10 moves. He decided he would toy with her, maybe let her think she had a chance before crushing her. It was his favorite way to do business, and his favorite way to play chess. Elena moved her king's pawn to E4. Standard. Solid. Julian responded instantly. C5, the Sicilian defense, an aggressive, counter-attacking opening. He wanted a fight. He wanted to complicate the board quickly, assuming her waitress brain wouldn't be able to handle the tactical chaos. Elena didn't flinch. She played knight to f3. The moves came fast at first. Snap, snap, snap. The sound of pieces hitting the board established a rhythm. d4, cx-d4, nx-d4, nf6. Julian watched her face. It was blank. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't looking at the money. Her eyes were darting across the board, processing. She played with a strange, orthodox style. She wasn't falling for his early traps, but she wasn't attacking either. She was building a wall. "You're playing scared, Elena," Julian taunted, moving his bishop to g5. "Trying to protect your king? You can't win by hiding." Elena didn't respond. She moved her bishop to e7, breaking the pin. "Are you mute?" Julian pressed. "Or just concentrating really hard so your brain doesn't overheat?" "I'm waiting for you to make a mistake," Elena said calmly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. "I don't make mistakes," Julian snapped. He slammed a rook onto the c-file. The game entered the middle game. The board was cluttered. Tension began to rise in the room. Usually by now an amateur would have blundered a piece. A fork, a skewer, a simple oversight. But Elena hadn't lost a single pawn without compensation. Her position was solid, compact. Julian felt a prickle of irritation. She was playing like a computer set to a defensive algorithm. It was boring. He wanted to break her open. He decided to sacrifice a knight. It was a flashy move. NDBO for 5. It looked like a blunder to the untrained eye, offering up the piece for free. But if she took it, Julian would unleash a mating attack on her king side that would be unstoppable. "Go ahead," Julian smiled, leaning forward. "Take it. It's a gift, like a tip," the crowd murmured. "He's brilliant," someone whispered. "She's done for." Elena's hand hovered over the knight. She hesitated. "He thinks I'm greedy," Elena thought. "He thinks I'm desperate for material gain." She pulled her hand back. Instead of taking the knight, she pushed her a-pawn. a6, kicking the knight back, refusing the sacrifice. Julian's smile faltered. That was the best move, the only move that kept her in the game. How did she see that? "You got lucky," Julian muttered, retracting his knight. "Luck has nothing to do with geometry, Mr. Thorne," Elena replied. She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. For a second, the waitress disappeared. In her place was a predator. Julian felt a spike of adrenaline. He sat up straighter. "Okay, no more mercy." The atmosphere in the lounge shifted. The spectators stopped chatting. They realized this wasn't a slaughter. It was a siege. Elena's mind was racing. She wasn't just playing Julian. She was playing the ghost of her father. "Focus, Ilara," he would say. He always called her Ilara, her middle name. The board is a mirror. It shows you who the person is. "Look at him." She looked at Julian. He was impatient. He was used to getting what he wanted immediately. He kept checking his Rolex. He moved his pieces with force. He was overextending his queen, bringing her out too early to try and intimidate her. He's arrogant, Elena thought. Use it. She began to lay the trap. It was slow, subtle. She weakened her own king side intentionally, creating a hole in her defense. To an amateur, it looked like fatigue. To a grandmaster, it was a siren song. Julian saw the opening. His eyes lit up. Finally, he breathed. The crack in the armor. He began to maneuver his heavy pieces toward the gap. He was so focused on the attack, so focused on the kill, that he stopped looking at his own back rank. Check, Julian declared, slamming his queen down. Elena blocked with a knight. Check again, Julian pushed a bishop forward. Elena moved her king. "You're running, Elena. You're running out of squares." Julian's voice rose, attracting even more attention from the bar. "Give up. Save yourself the embarrassment of the speech on the table. Walk away now, and I'll let you keep your job." Elena looked at the board. She had calculated this 12 moves ago. He was exactly where she wanted him. "I don't want my job," Elena said, her voice gaining strength. "I want the 5,000. Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You're delusional. Look at the board. I'm 3 moves away from crushing you." "Are you?" Elena reached out. She bypassed the defense of her king entirely. She picked up her white-squared bishop, a piece that had been sitting quietly in the corner for the entire game, forgotten by Julian. She slid it across the entire diagonal. It sliced through the board like a knife. Bishop to f3. The move didn't put him in check. It didn't take a piece. It just sat there. Julian frowned. "What is that? A desperate waste of a turn?" He ignored it. He moved his queen for the final blow. "Checkmate in 1, Elena." "Look again," she whispered. Julian paused. He looked at her bishop on f3. Then he looked at his king. Then he looked at his queen. His face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast it looked like he might faint. Because of her bishop move, his queen was now cut off from returning to defend. And behind his aggressive line of attack, Elena's rooks were lined up like a firing squad. If he moved his queen to deliver the checkmate, he would leave his own king exposed to a forced mate in 2. He was paralyzed. The checkmate in 1 he had promised was a mirage. He had walked into a minefield. I can block it," Julian stammered. He reached for a pawn. "Touch rule," Eleanor said sharply. "You touched the queen. You have to move her." The room was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Julian Thorne, the billionaire shark, was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. He looked at the waitress, the girl with the stain on her apron and the cheap shoes. She wasn't smiling. She looked sad, almost. "Who are you?" Julian whispered. "It's your move, Mr. Thorne," Elena said. Julian's hand shook. It was a microscopic tremor, invisible to the casual observer, but to Elena it was a seismic event. He moved his queen, retreating, abandoning his attack to desperately shore up his defenses. The initiative had flipped. The hunter was now the prey. "You're in trouble, Julian," Marcus Sterling called out from the sidelines. He sounded delighted. There was nothing the rich loved more than seeing one of their own bleed. "Shut up, Marcus," Julian hissed. He loosened his tie. "It's just a minor setback. She overextended to get that bishop there. I can trap it." Elena didn't let him breathe. Now that she had seized the tempo, she transformed. The defensive, cautious waitress was gone. In her place was a tactical storm. She began to sacrifice pawns to open up lines of attack. Pawn to h4, pawn to g4. She was ripping open the shelter around his king. "Why are you doing that?" Julian muttered, capturing a pawn. "You're giving me material." "Material is irrelevant if the king falls," Elena recited. It was lesson 1 from her father. The king is the ego. Kill the ego. As the game intensified, Elena's mind drifted back. Flashback. 10 years ago. A smoky basement in Chicago. The sound of rain against a small, barred window. "Again," her father said. His name was Victor Vance, once a Soviet contender, now a ghost hiding in America, scrubbing floors and drinking too much vodka. "I'm tired, Papa," young Eleanor, 14 years old, rubbed her eyes. "The board doesn't care if you are tired." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "Life is tired. Poverty is tired. This?" He pointed to the chess pieces. This is the only place where you are equal to a king. On these 64 squares, nobody cares that we are poor. Nobody cares that we are immigrants. They only care if you are smart. Do you want to be smart, Elena? Or do you want to be a victim? Smart, she whispered. Then find the mate. Look at the knight. The knight is the trickster. Use him. Present day. Elena looked at her knight. It was positioned on F5, a monstrous outpost. Julian was crumbling. He was taking longer and longer between moves. He ordered another scotch, downing it in one gulp. "You're cheating," he muttered. He looked up at Rick, the manager. "She's cheating. She's using an engine. Check her ears for an earpiece." "Sir?" Rick looked terrified. "She's a waitress!" Julian shouted, causing the crowd to jump. "She can't play like this. It's impossible. She's getting signals from someone." Elena stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Search me," she said. She held her arms out. "Check my ears. Check my pockets." The crowd murmured. It was a humiliation for Julian to even suggest it. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus Sterling stepped in, a smirk on his face. "Don't be pathetic. She's just beating you. Take it like a man." Julian's face turned a violent shade of red. He waved Rick away. "Fine. Fine. Let's finish this." He made a move. Rook to E1. He was trying to force a trade, to simplify the board and aim for a draw. If he could get a draw, he kept his money and his pride. But Eleanor saw the geometry. She saw the beautiful, terrible end. She didn't take the rook. Instead, she picked up her queen. The crowd gasped as she moved the most powerful piece on the board directly into the line of fire of Julian's pawn. Queen to G3. "What are you doing?" Julian squinted. "I can just take your queen." "Take it!" Elena challenged. Julian hesitated. If he took the queen, his pawn moved, which opened the H file, which allowed her rook, he calculated. Takes queen, rook checks, king moves, bishop checks. His eyes went wide. If he took the queen, it was checkmate in 4 moves. But if he didn't take the queen, she was threatening checkmate on the next move anyway. It was a zugzwang, a situation where every possible move leads to disaster. Julian Thorne, the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers, the man who destroyed companies for sport, was completely, utterly helpless. He looked up at Elena. For the first time, he really saw her. He saw the intelligence in her grey eyes. He saw the strength in her posture. He realized that the waitress costume was just that, a costume. "Who taught you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. This is the Vance variation. Nobody plays this line. It fell out of favor in the 90s. Elena's heart skipped a beat. He knew the name. "My father," she said. "Victor Vance." Julian froze. "Victor Vance? The ghost of Kiev? The Grand Master who vanished in 1998? "He didn't vanish," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "He was blacklisted by people like you. Powerful men who didn't like losing to a poor man." A murmur went through the crowd. Victor Vance was a legend, a myth among chess enthusiasts. "He died last year," Elena continued, tears pricking her eyes but refusing to fall, "in a state hospital, because we couldn't afford the surgery." She pointed to the board. "You owe me $5,000, Mr. Thorne, and an apology." Julian stared at the board. He looked at the impossible trap she had set. Slowly, painfully, Julian reached out. He grabbed his king. He didn't tip it over gently. He threw it. The king bounced off the board and clattered onto the floor, rolling under a nearby table. "I don't owe you anything," Julian spat, standing up. He grabbed his jacket. "You lost," Marcus shouted. "Pay the girl." "She hustled me," Julian yelled, his composure shattering. "She's a pro. She misrepresented herself. The bet is void." He turned to leave, his bodyguard stepping forward to clear a path through the stunned crowd. Elena stood there, her hands shaking. The money was on the table. But Julian was reaching for it. He was going to take it back. "Don't touch it!" A deep voice boomed from the entrance of the lounge. Everyone turned. Standing there was an older man with silver hair and a stern face. He was leaning on a cane, but he radiated authority. It was Elias Thorne, Julian's father, the founder of the empire Julian was currently running. "Father?" Julian paled. "What are you doing here?" "Watching my son disgrace the family name," Elias said, walking slowly toward the table. He stopped in front of Eleanor. He looked at the board, analyzing the final position. "Brilliant," Elias murmured. "Simply brilliant. A queen sacrifice to force a smothered mate." He looked at Julian with disgust. "You made a bet, Julian. A Thorne honors his debts." "She's a waitress, Dad. It's a trick." "She is Victor Vance's daughter," Elias said softly, "and you just lost to royalty." Elias reached into his own pocket. He pulled out a checkbook. "My son is a fool and a poor loser," Elias said to Eleanor. "He bet you 5,000? "Yes," Eleanor said. Elias wrote a check. He tore it out and handed it to her. Eleanor looked at the numbers. $50,000. "Consider the extra a consulting fee," Elias said. "I have a business proposition for you, Miss Vance. One that involves using that brain for something better than carrying drinks." Julian watched, fuming, humiliated in front of the entire city's elite. But Eleanor wasn't looking at the check. She was looking at the chessboard. For the first time in years, she felt her father's hand on her shoulder. "Checkmate, Papa." The check in Eleanor's pocket felt heavy, like a stone rather than a lifeline. $50,000. It was enough to change everything. Yet, as she stood in the alleyway behind the Obsidian Lounge, shivering in the Seattle drizzle, she felt a profound sense of unease. Rick hadn't just fired her. He had practically thrown her out. "You embarrassed a billionaire, Elena. Do you know how much business we'll lose? Get your things. You're done." She held a cardboard box containing her spare apron, a bottle of ibuprofen, and a framed photo of her father. The rain plastered her hair to her skull. She was a winner, technically, but she felt like a piece captured and removed from the board. A sleek black Maybach rolled silently down the alley, splashing water onto her worn sneakers. The rear window hummed down. "Get in, Miss Vance," Elias Thorne said. Elena hesitated. "I'm wet, sir. I'll ruin the leather." "The leather is replaceable. Talent is not." "Get in." Eleanor climbed in. The interior smelled of peppermint and fresh ink. Elias sat stiffly, his cane resting between his knees like a scepter. He didn't look at her. He looked at a tablet displaying stock market trends. "My son is a brilliant engineer," Elias said, his voice gravelly. "He built the propulsion systems that Thorne Dynamics is famous for. But as a CEO, he is a child with a flamethrower. He lacks patience. He lacks the long game." "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked, shivering slightly. "Because he needs a keeper, and I am too old to babysit." Elias turned to her. His eyes were the same icy blue as Julian's, but where Julian's were fire, Elias's was steel. "I want to hire you. I'm a waitress, Mr. Thorne. I was a waitress. You are a strategist. You saw a mating net in a chaotic position in 10 seconds. That is not a waitress skill. That is a CEO skill." Elias handed her a thick manila envelope. "Position: Executive Strategy Consultant. Salary: $200,000 a year. Full benefits. And a signing bonus that will clear your family's remaining debts." Elena opened the envelope. The contract was thick. It was insane. "What do I actually do?" "You play chess." Elias smiled, a cold, thin expression. But the pieces are companies, and the opponent is the market. And sometimes, the opponent is Julian. Elena looked out the window. If she took this job, she would be entering the lion's den. Julian would hate her. He would try to destroy her every single day. "One condition," Elena said, her voice steadying. "Name it." "I want access to the Thorn Dynamics archives, specifically the legal files from 1998. Elias stiffened imperceptibly. His grip on the cane tightened. 1998. Why? Because that's the year my father was accused of stealing proprietary code. That's the year his life ended. I want to know who really did it." Elias stared at her for a long moment. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. Finally, he nodded once. "Done. But be warned, Miss Vance. Sometimes the truth is a more dangerous trap than any gambit on a board." Thorn Dynamics was a fortress of glass and steel piercing the sky. The lobby was a cathedral of capitalism, echoing with the footsteps of people whose suits cost more than Eleanor's childhood home. Eleanor walked in on Monday morning. She had spent the weekend preparing. She had bought 3 new suits, sharp, tailored, armored. She had cut her hair into a sleek bob. She wore heels that clicked like gunshots on the marble floor. She wasn't Elena the waitress anymore. She was Elena the player. When she stepped off the elevator on the 50th floor, the entire office seemed to stop. Whispers trailed her like smoke. That's her. That's the girl who humiliated Julian. She walked straight to the executive conference room. The board meeting was already in progress. Julian stood at the head of the table, projecting a hologram of a new drone prototype. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red. When the door opened and Elena walked in, he stopped mid-sentence. "What is she doing here?" Julian growled, looking at his father who sat at the opposite end. "Ms. Vance is observing," Elias said calmly, "and advising." "Advising?" Julian laughed, a harsh sound. "She pours coffee, Dad. She doesn't advise on aerospace engineering." "Continue the presentation, Julian," Elias commanded. Julian glared at Elena, his jaw working. "Fine." He turned back to the board members. "Project Razor is over budget, but the acquisition of Kaito Systems will solve our battery density issues. I'm pushing the merger through this afternoon. We're offering 40 million. Elena sat silently, listening. She watched the faces of the board members. She watched Julian. She looked at the data scrolling on the screens. It was a chess position, a complex one. Julian was pushing for a quick attack, the merger, to solve a structural weakness, the battery issue. But he was ignoring a subtle threat on the flank. "Mr. Thorne," Elena spoke up. Her voice was clear, cutting through the drone of the projector. Julian froze. "You do not have speaking privileges." "I believe I do," Elena said, sliding her contract across the table. "Page 4, paragraph 2, strategic oversight." She stood up and walked to the hologram. "You're offering 40 million for Kaito Systems because you need their patents," Elena said, "but you didn't check their subsidiary holdings in the Cayman Islands." She tapped the screen, expanding a small data point that everyone else had ignored. "Kaito is being sued by the European Union for environmental violations. The lawsuit drops next week. If you acquire them today, Thorn Dynamics inherits that liability. The fine isn't 40 million, it's 200 million. The room went dead silent. The CFO, a heavy-set man named Arthur Pendleton, frantically typed on his laptop. She's right, my God. The filing was buried in a shell company report." Elena turned to Julian. "You were about to blunder your queen, Julian. You were so focused on the battery tech, you didn't look at the rest of the board." Julian looked at the screen, then at Elena. He looked like he had been slapped. The board members were murmuring. looking at Elena with newfound respect and fear. "We kill the deal," Elias said from the end of the table. "Good catch, Ms. Vance." Julian slammed his hand on the table. "This is a setup. How did she find that? I have a team of 50 analysts." "They were looking for what you told them to find," Elena said coolly. "I was looking for what you were hiding." Julian walked up to her. He was tall, looming over her. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of his rage. "Do you think you're clever?" he whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "You think because you won one game, you belong here? This isn't a game, Elena. These are sharks, and you're bleeding." "I'm not bleeding, Julian," Elena whispered back, holding his gaze. "I'm sharpening my knife." The tension between them was electric. It was hatred, yes, but it was also something else. Mutual recognition. They were the two smartest people in the room, and they both knew it. 2 weeks passed. The war between Julian and Elena became the office legend. It was a cold war. Julian would leave piles of complex technical documents on her desk at 5 p.m., demanding summaries by 8 a.m. Elena would return them by midnight, corrected and improved, with sticky notes pointing out his grammatical errors. Julian tried to freeze her out of meetings. Elena showed up anyway, armed with Elias's proxy. But Julian was planning a counterattack. He wasn't just a spoiled brat. He was a genius in his own right, and he knew how to dig. It was late on a Tuesday. The office was empty, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen galaxy. Elena was in her office, a glass box overlooking the bay, working on a logistics report. The door opened. Julian walked in. He held 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "Peace offering?" he asked. Elena didn't look up from her screen. "I doubt it. Check your pockets for a wire." Julian chuckled darkly. He placed a glass on her desk and poured. "You've been effective, Elena. I'll admit that. The logistics overhaul saved us 8% this quarter. My father is pleased." "But you aren't," Elena said, finally looking at him. "I don't like variables I can't control," Julian admitted. He took a sip, leaning against her desk. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up. He looked dangerous and devastatingly attractive. "And you are a variable." "I'm an asset. You're just too proud to use me." "Maybe." Julian swirled his drink. "Or maybe I know that assets can become liabilities." He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon, but what he produced was far more damaging. It was a photocopy of an old police report. "Victor Vance," Julian read. "Arrested 1988. Corporate espionage. Theft of the Deep Blue algorithm. Prototypes from IBM. He avoided prison by fleeing the country, but he was banned from competitive chess for life." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "He was framed." "Was he?" Julian tossed the paper onto her keyboard. "I dug a little deeper, Elena. I found the bank records. 2 days before the theft, your father received a deposit of $50,000 from a shell company linked to the Russian mafia." "That's a lie." Elena stood up, her hands shaking. "He was poor. We starved." "Maybe he gambled it away," Julian shrugged. "Grandmasters are often addicts. Gambling, alcohol, pride." He leaned in close, invading her personal space. "My father hired you because he thinks you're a prodigy. But if the board finds out that our chief strategist is the daughter of a known corporate spy, a thief, you'll be radioactive, you'll be fired, and you'll never work in this town again." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This was a check, a brutal, discovered check. "What do you want, Julian?" "I want you to quit," Julian said softly. "Leave the company. Leave Seattle. Go back to being a nobody, and I'll bury this file. Your father's legacy What's left of it stays intact. Elena looked at the file. She looked at Julian. He thought he had her mated. But Elena remembered something her father had told her about the Sicilian defense. It is a fight to the death. You imbalance the position. You invite chaos. And when they think they are safe, you strike. She realized something. Julian had dug this up too easily. The bank records from 1998, those would be sealed or destroyed by now unless someone had kept them. You got this from your father's archives, Elena realized aloud. Julian blinked. What? You didn't find this on your own. You don't know how to look for 90s paper trails. You found this in Elias's private safe. Elena stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. Now she was the one invading his space. Does your father know you're using his own secrets to blackmail his employees? He doesn't need to know, Julian said, his voice faltering slightly. You're right, Elena whispered. She reached out and took the paper from his hand. She didn't tear it up. She folded it and put it in her pocket. He doesn't. What are you doing? Julian asked. I'm keeping this, because if this gets out, it doesn't just hurt me. It hurts Thorn Dynamics. If the world finds out that the company employed a spy's daughter at the highest level, the stock drops. And if they find out the CEO's son leaked it, you'll be removed by the board for negligence. Elena smiled. It was the same smile she wore when she moved her bishop to F3. You just handed me a grenade, Julian, and you pulled the pin thinking I would hold it. But we're in the same room. Julian stared at her. He was breathing hard. He was furious, but he was also impressed. The air between them crackled. He looked at her lips, then back to her eyes. You're a monster, he whispered. I learned from the best, she replied. Suddenly, the intercom on Eleanor's desk buzzed. It was the night security. Miss Vance, Mr. Thorne, sorry to disturb, but there are police in the lobby. They have a warrant. Julian frowned. A warrant? For what? For Mr. Elias Thorne. The guard's voice trembled. They're arresting him for securities fraud. Elena and Julian looked at each other. The rivalry vanished in an instant. The king was under attack, and if the king fell, the whole board would be wiped clean. Dad, Julian breathed. He ran for the door. Julian, wait! Elena grabbed her coat and ran after him. The game had just changed. They weren't playing against each other anymore. They were playing against the world. The arrest of Elias Thorne hit the news cycle like a nuclear bomb. By the time Julian and Elena reached the Thorn Dynamics headquarters, the stock had plummeted 40%. The lobby was a zoo of reporters, flashing cameras, and shouting questions. Mr. Thorne, is it true your father embezzled the pension fund? Miss Vance, what is your role in the cover-up? Julian pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of stone, dragging Eleanor by the hand into the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the noise, he slumped against the metal wall. The arrogance was gone. The billionaire playboy was gone. In his place was a terrified son. He didn't do it, Julian said, his voice cracking. My father is ruthless, but he's not a thief. He built this company from a garage. He wouldn't gut it. Elena watched him. She saw the trembling in his hands, the same tremor she had seen on the chessboard. She knew that feeling. It was the feeling of losing control. We need to look at the evidence, Elena said, her voice calm and authoritative. The police said securities fraud. That means a paper trail. Someone planted it. Who? Julian paced the small elevator. Who has the access? Who hates us enough? Marcus Sterling, Elena said. Julian stopped. Marcus? He's a hedge fund manager. He's an annoyance, not a mastermind. He was at the club that night, Elena reminded him. He watched you lose. He watched your father humiliate you, and—" She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the financial news. "Look at this. Sterling Capital just announced a hostile takeover bid for Thorn Dynamics. They're buying the dip. They're trying to swallow your company while it's bleeding." The elevator dinged at the penthouse floor. They stepped out into Julian's office, a sprawling space that felt suddenly like a bunker. "It's a pincer attack," Elena muttered, her mind visualizing the corporate structure like a chess position. "They arrest the king, Elias, to create chaos. Then they use the queen, Capital, to seize the center. The board." "How do we stop it?" Julian asked, looking at her. He wasn't looking at her like a waitress anymore. He was looking at her like she was the only lifeline he had. "We need to find the link," Elena said. "We need to find who is funding Sterling. He doesn't have the liquidity to buy Thorn Dynamics on his own." They spent the night in the office. Take-out boxes piled up on the mahogany desk. Julian hacked into Sterling's encrypted servers, a skill he had picked up in his engineering days, while Elena cross-referenced the financial data with the old files from 1998. At 3:15 a.m., Elena found it. "Julian," she whispered, "look at this signature." She pointed to a scanned document from the 1998 case against her father. The witness who had testified against Victor Vance was a man named S. Cross. Then she pointed to the shell company funding Marcus Sterling's takeover bid. The holding company was Cross Industries. "Sebastian Cross," Julian breathed, "the shipping magnate. He's a ghost. Nobody sees him. He lives on a private island." "He hated my father," Elena said, her blood running cold. "My father beat him in the 1995 World Candidates Tournament. Cross was humiliated. He swore he would destroy Victor. And now he's destroying my father to get to the company," Julian realized. "It's all one game. He waited 30 years for the perfect moment." Just then, Julian's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He put it on speaker. "Mr. Thorn?" A smooth, synthetic voice spoke. "And Miss Vance. I assume you've connected the dots by now." "Cross," Julian spat. "Mr. Sterling tells me you are resisting the takeover," Sebastian Cross said calmly. "It is futile. I own the debt. I own the prosecutors. Your father will die in prison, Julian. Unless what? Unless you want to settle this like gentlemen. I am a man of tradition. I hear you have a prodigy on your payroll, the daughter of my old friend, Victor." Elena stepped closer to the phone. "What do you want?" "A game," Cross said. "One game of chess, tomorrow night, at my estate. If you win, I withdraw the bid and provide the exonerating evidence for Elias. If you lose, you sign over your controlling shares to me, and you resign immediately." "You want me to bet my entire company on a board game?" Julian asked, incredulous. "You bet 5,000 against a waitress for fun," Cross mocked. "Why not bet an empire for your father's life?" The line went dead. Julian looked at Elena. "He wants to play me?" "No," Elena shook her head. "He knows you're not strong enough. He wants to play me. He wants to kill the Vance name once and for all." The flight to Sebastian Cross's estate was silent. They took the company helicopter, flying over the dark waters of the Pacific to a private island off the coast. Julian sat opposite Eleanor. He looked at her, really looked at her. She was wearing a simple black dress she had bought from a department store. But she looked like a queen. She was studying a database of Cross's old games on a tablet. "You don't have to do this," Julian said softly. Elena didn't look up. "He framed my father. He ruined my family. I have to do this." "If you lose, I lose everything," Julian said. Elena looked up then. "Do you trust me?" Julian paused. 2 weeks ago, he wouldn't have trusted her to pour water. Now? He reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm against hers. "I trust you with my life, Elena." The connection was electric. For a moment, the helicopter, the lawsuit, the danger, it all faded. There was just the two of them. Julian leaned in, his eyes searching hers. "When this is over," he whispered, "I'm taking you to dinner. A real dinner, where you sit at the table." Eleanor smiled, a small, sad smile. "Let's win first." They landed. The estate was a fortress of brutalist architecture, concrete and glass perched on a cliff edge. Marcus Sterling was waiting at the landing pad, smirking. "Welcome to the slaughter," Sterling sneered. They were led into a massive library. The walls were lined with first-edition books. In the center of the room sat a table made of meteorite iron, and behind it sat Sebastian Cross. He was an old man, withered and frail, hooked up to a portable oxygen tank, but his eyes were sharp, glittering with malice. "Elena Vance," Cross wheezed. "You look just like him. Weak chin, desperate eyes." "And you look like a man who needs to buy his victories," Elena shot back. Cross chuckled. "Sit." Julian stood behind Elena's chair, his hand resting on the backrest, a silent guardian. Marcus Sterling stood behind Cross. "The terms are set," Cross said. "One game, no time limit, standard 5D rules." Elena sat. She chose the black pieces. "I prefer to defend." "Fitting," Cross sneered. He moved his pawn to d4. The game began. It wasn't a fast game like the one at the club. It was a slow, grinding war. Cross was a positional master. He didn't take risks. He slowly suffocated his opponent, taking space, locking down the board. Elena played with precision, but she was struggling. Cross knew her father's style. He knew the Vance variation. Every time she tried to create complications, he shut it down. An hour passed. Then 2. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock and the hiss of Cross's oxygen tank. Julian watched the board, sweat trickling down his back. He knew enough chess to know that Eleanor was in trouble. She was down a pawn. Her position was cramped. Cross had a knight planted in the center of the board that was radiating power like a dark sun. "Give up, child," Cross whispered. "You are just like Victor. He didn't know when to quit either. That's why I had to remove him." Eleanor's hand froze over the board. "You admit it?" "Of course," Cross smiled. "I paid the IBM engineers to plant the files in his bag. It was so easy, and watching him beg, it was better than winning any tournament." Rage flared in Eleanor's chest, hot, blinding rage. She wanted to flip the board. She wanted to scream. "He wants you angry," a voice in her head said. It wasn't her father's voice this time. It was Julian's. "Don't let your emotions dictate your knight movement." She looked at the board through the haze of her anger. She saw Cross's smug face. She saw his solid, impenetrable defense. And then she saw it. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was a move that no computer would recommend. It required sacrificing her queen. Again. But this time, it wasn't for a forced mate. It was for a chance. A positional gamble that would leave her with only 2 bishops and a rook against his queen and knight. If she was wrong, she lost the company. She lost Julian's future. She looked up at Julian. He gave her a subtle nod. "I'm with you." Elena picked up her queen. Queen to h4, sacrificing herself to the white pawn. Cross frowned. He looked at the move. Desperation or stupidity? "Take it," Elena said. Cross took the queen. The room gasped. Marcus Sterling laughed. "It's over. She blundered her queen." But Elena didn't flinch. She moved her bishop. Bishop to f3. Suddenly, the board transformed. The 2 bishops, acting like snipers, sliced across the open board. The queen Cross had captured was now useless, blocked by his own pawns. Cross's smile vanished. He reached for his knight. He realized he couldn't move it. "Zugzwang," Elena whispered. Cross's hand started to shake. He looked at the lines. If he moved his king, he was mated. If he moved his queen, he lost it for free. If he moved his rook, he lost control of the back rank. He was a billionaire with all the power in the world, and he was paralyzed by 2 pieces of wood. You witch," Cross hissed. "Check," Elena said, moving her rook. "I can block," Cross shouted. He slammed a pawn forward. "Check." Elena moved the bishop again. Cross stared at the board. His oxygen machine hissed rhythmically. Hiss, click, hiss, click. He looked for an escape. There was none. The ghost of Victor Vance had come back to haunt him. Sebastian Cross, the man who never lost, slowly tipped his king over. "Checkmate," Elena said softly. Julian let out a breath he had been holding for 3 hours. He grabbed Eleanor's shoulders and squeezed. "You did it," he whispered. "My God, you did it." Cross sat slumped in his chair, defeated. He gestured weakly to Marcus. "Give them the files. Get them out of my sight." The sun was rising over Seattle when they returned. They went straight to the police station. With the files provided by Cross, documents proving the wire transfers and the falsified logs, Elias Thorne was released by noon. The reunion was brief and professional, but when Elias looked at Eleanor, he dipped his head, a bow of respect from one king to another. "You saved my company, Miss Vance," Elias said, "and my son." "She did more than that," Julian said, stepping forward. "She saved the game." Elias smiled and walked away to his waiting car, leaving them alone on the precinct steps. The city was waking up. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. "So," Julian said, turning to Elena, "I believe I owe you a dinner." "You owe me a raise," Elena corrected with a smile. "That too. How does CEO sound?" Elena laughed. "I think I'll stick to strategy. I like playing from the shadows." Julian stepped closer. The tension that had been building for weeks, through the insults, the chess games, the late nights and the helicopter ride, finally reached its breaking point. "Eleanor," he said, his voice serious, "I was an idiot in that club. I judged you. I was arrogant." "Yes, you were," she agreed. "But you changed the board," Julian said. "You changed me." He reached out and tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. "I don't want to play games anymore," Julian whispered. "Not with you." Eleanor looked into his blue eyes. They weren't cold anymore. They were warm, open, and full of something that terrified and thrilled her more than any checkmate. "Then make your move, Julian," she whispered. Julian leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative opening move. It was a decisive, passionate capture. Elena melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. They stood there on the steps, the billionaire and the waitress, the king and the queen, united on the same side of the board. The game was over. They had both won. And that is how a simple game of chess changed the fate of an empire. Julian learned that true genius can be found in the most unexpected places, and Elena proved that a pawn can bring down a king if she has the courage to move forward. They exposed a 30-year-old conspiracy, saved a family legacy, and found love in the process. It turns out the most important move isn't the one you make on the board, but the one you make with your heart. If you enjoyed this story of underdogs, strategy, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What was your favorite part? Did you expect the twist with Sebastian Cross? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.